Welcome to WizeUp. I'm Paul Arthur. Lots to chat about today. Going to touch base on the Bill C2 and your privacy rights and a whole bunch more. So before we get into that, do want to give you a quick reminder to hit subscribe and tell your friends about us if you're enjoying the show. And we're welcoming Leighton Grey again, one of our favorite guests here. He's one of Canada's top attorneys, also the host of the Grey Matter podcast, @Grey Matter Convo. Leighton, good to have you with us again.
It's great to be back on the show, Paul. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, you betcha. Never seem to run out of good topics, when you look at our Canadian political realm here. Bill C2, let's start there. Now, this, of course, has some good intentions, I think, aimed at targeting organized crime and strengthening our border security. But, of course, we are seeing all kinds of red flags coming up from various groups across the country. Privacy rights are definitely impacted by this bill, it seems. So, you're the lawyer, you know the stuff here. Police apparently have the right to search mail in transit without a warrant. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yes, this is a good example of the devil's in the details,
Yeah.
and it proves Benjamin Franklin's old adage that if you give up a little bit of freedom to get security, you end up with neither. And really, what we're seeing now is a trend that started probably in the aftermath of 9/11. When the Department of Homeland Security was created in the United States. And of course, if you followed the things like WikiLeaks and Edward Snowden in the US, you know where this has led. Now governments have assumed the right to surveil us for the public good. And sadly, courts have upheld this. And progressively, we've had legislation become more and more intrusive into not only our privacy, which is arguably non-existent, but also invaded our individual liberty. And C2 is one of these Trojan horse type laws, which purports to be in our public interest, which purports to protect public safety, but is actually aimed at demonizing the citizen and treating the citizen
So you think
as
that's
the enemy of the
intentional,
state.
actually? Like, is this by design?
Yes. There's no question it is. There's no question it is. And it's because, unfortunately, governments today, certainly this is true of the government of Canada, I think this is also true of the United States, certainly in Great Britain and others, have begun to view the individual and the exercise of individual liberty as a threat to the power of the state. And of course, this is upside down in terms of our history and what our constitutions say. Our constitutions say that the government is supposed to be the servant of the people. That's certainly a biblical concept. But unfortunately, that isn't the reality. And governments today have assumed the right to revoke and to treat constitutionally protected freedoms as so many privileges or licenses, and that they can invade willy-nilly. And this problem is particularly acute in Canada. And I think a lot of this was set up by the COVID era and the lockdowns, which were almost invariably upheld by our courts. That is, violations of fundamental liberties, including freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and others, freedom to associate and to congregate. All of these were blatantly violated by governments, but were upheld under Section 1 of the Charter. And of course, now we have Bill C2, which invades a whole host of constitutionally protected freedoms, but the government is coming forward and just blatantly
and I
telling
wonder
us.
if they're just, basically confident in our Supreme Court of Canada, our judiciary system, because it leans toward, basically, judicial activism, if you will. We're just going to kind of,
Yes.
manipulate a few things and lean this way and that way, and we'll agree with what the current government is doing. So the other angle on this one, of course, besides the mail intervention here, it's the electronic mail, electronic services providers, so email providers, social media platforms, internet service providers, that sort of thing. If I'm understanding this correctly, again, they are basically forced to hand over, personal details to the police without a warrant?
Yes, this is one of the implications. And again, this is all in the name of public safety. But the question is, well, who's the enemy? Who are we being protected from? And of course, set against that, Paul, is there is some other legislation, for example, Bill C-63,
Mm.
which is going to not only compel speech, but it's going to create a new crime of hate speech in this country. And so people like independent broadcasters like yourself,
Yeah.
or podcasters like me, are going to have to be very, very watchful and careful about this. The other thing about C2 that is very scary, that perhaps is not being talked about enough, is its assault on cash. And cash
Okay.
is very connected to our freedom, because of course historically, the economy, commerce, was operated outside of government, but government has invaded it and really taken over the concept of managing the economy. And so now, under this new bill, it will be illegal. It'll be a criminal offense to complete any cash transaction in an amount of $10,000 or more, which is a very, very dangerous thing. And we must question why. Why is this restriction coming? And the only conceivable answer is that this government wants to bring in digital currency. And with digital currency, we know from seeing the example in China, is a social credit system where the government can map all of our transactions and essentially control our commerce with each other,
Yeah.
which is a very dangerous thing, and as you know, is actually referenced in the Bible as a sign of the end times. So this is not a very good thing for Canada at all. This legislation, and I'm praying that that this is not going to come into being in Canada. However, it looks as though it's going to be unstoppable here, and we're all going to be faced with it.
Yeah. Again, the issue with sure, more security, but for who, right? Because
Yeah.
again, we've seen this where bank accounts have been frozen during the truckers' convoy. And, will that happen again? I would suspect very likely. If you're not popular, you're not, following the government narrative and checking off those boxes that how the government wants you to live, whether it's having to do with climate and so forth, whatever it might be, then maybe you're going to lose some banking privileges, have some assets frozen, or maybe not allowed to, you know, buy a plane ticket to wherever you want to go. Who knows
Yeah.
what it might end up being? But great concern. What do you think the public reaction to this will be? I guess, will there be enough outcry, enough pushback on this area?
Well, I certainly hope so. I can tell you anecdotally, I'm already hearing in my professional life from people who are being debanked, where the big
Really? Right
banks,
now?
yes, yep, right now it's happening. I won't say which ones, but we know the big banks,
Yep.
and they are already assessing people on the basis of their social credit scores. This has happened to me personally, actually, with
Wow.
one of the big banks. And so, really, the seeds have been sown for this, and what we're seeing is, with Mark Carney in place as our prime minister, he really sees Canada as an extension of Europe, of the EU, and of Great Britain, and he wants to make over Canada into a European nation, and this is why he's making trade and commerce commitments to the EU. He says Canada is the most European nation outside of Europe, and now he's made a huge military commitment from Canada to the European Union. And so it's very clear that unfortunately, the plan of this federal government is to have Canada be much like what Great Britain is right now, and that is something that should alarm Canadians greatly, because several thousands of people have already been prosecuted successfully and jailed in that country for making things like Facebook posts.
Yeah, exactly. Or silently praying outside of an abortion
Right.
clinic, these kinds of things. Silent prayer, how dangerous is that to the public?
Yeah.
Your thoughts basically being monitored, if you will.
Hmm.
Okay, where do
And
you go?
yeah, it's so alarming because England is really the birthplace in a lot of ways of the modern concept of civil liberties. I mean,
Hmm.
John Milton and his tract Areopagitica, basically saying to back in the 18th century, saying to Parliament, look, the only type of speech that needs protection is that which could offend.
Yeah.
And they've turned that on its head, haven't they?
Absolutely, and it's ongoing, and we
Yeah.
kind of got to continually be pushing back against this here. One of the kind of interesting twists with Bill C-2 is there are a number of pro-immigration groups that are talking about that this bill will limit the ability of individuals to claim asylum in Canada. So there's that angle, and then that ties in with right now, of course, various governments like the current Liberals as well, saying that they wanted to put a cap on immigration, and yet we see in the first quarter of 2025 some 800,000 immigrants allowed into Canada. So any thoughts on that? Will it limit asylum claims?
I think it could have that impact, although I don't know how many asylum claims are actually being made at this time. I listened to an interview recently from Jason Kenney, who of course was immigration minister in the Harper government, and he said something really shocking. That he said that at the time that he was immigration minister, this is only about 10 years ago, there were less than 100,000 such asylum claims at any given time in Canada, and that they were processing them within 3 months. And he predicts he thinks now that there are actually millions of such claims, and that essentially they will never ever be processed. One of the frightening things that's happening in this country, Paul, that I think is lamentable, is Canada, the countries like Canada and the United States have been the most welcoming countries in the world.
Yeah.
We are nations of immigrants, and unfortunately, the immigrant is being vilified, and it's really not their fault. They're being promised a country in Canada, for example, that really doesn't exist anymore. And unfortunately, I think that's a very serious promise that's being broken to those people, and they're entering into a situation really blindly. And I'm sure there are some people who maybe don't have good intentions coming to Canada, but I think they are the vast minority. I think the majority of people coming to Canada are well intended and want to fit in and have a new life here. And then there's the people who are generational immigrants who have come over maybe in the 1970s and 1980s, worked very hard
Yep.
to escape the situation in the country that they came from, and all of a sudden they're finding Canada is becoming a place like the one that they left, and that's
Yeah.
another broken promise. And unfortunately, when you break promises like this on immigration, it tends to drive up this anti-immigration sentiment, this hatred, which is, as you know, is always bad. We want to treat everyone as our neighbors. That's the Lord's second commandment, to love our neighbor. Even the migrant, even the immigrant deserves to be treated with love and respect. And it's government ineptitude and frankly corruption, which I think is driving up this anti-immigration sentiment, which in a real sense is very anti-Canadian.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're seeing large amounts of, immigrants coming in, and part of the problem, again, is that a lack of competence in how to handle this. Of course, it drives up, unemployment, drives up the price of housing and so forth, so it causes a lot of chaos. And our current immigration minister admitting that, she doesn't actually know where a lot of these immigrants are with expired visas. And, I think there's something like close to 5 million people with visas that are expiring this year. So, and they are expecting, our government is expecting them to leave voluntarily. Now, anybody with a, functioning brain in their head realizes that's not going to be, happening, at least not anywhere close to 100%, right?
Yeah,
I mean, some will,
yeah.
of course, but that's, it's an issue, isn't it?
It certainly is. And we do need a functional immigration system. And we don't have a functional immigration system right now. Clearly, a terrible error in judgment was made. In fact, our former prime minister, one of the only honest things he ever said publicly was that he messed up on the immigration question. They thought that massive immigration would be a net good for Canada, and he admitted that that was a mistake. It's been a mistake for most of Europe. It was a mistake for Canada. I think we're seeing the ramifications of it in the U.S. Make no mistake, we need immigrants, and we need a manageable immigration system. but the one we have right now is seriously inept and defective and destructive to Canada. One thing I was shocked by, Paul, was the sort of 180-degree turn I heard just recently with Mr. Poilievre, who said that he wants to see a moratorium on immigration, much like we had about 100 years ago. Between about 1925 and 1965 and 70 in Canada, the United States, it was very difficult to immigrate here. Because we had a huge influx in the early part of the 20th century and the latter part of the 19th century. And that was designed to address the kind of problem we're facing right now. It's going to be interesting to see whether governments in Canada and the U.S. are going to take a similar approach in order to kind of get a handle on the number of people who are here and to manage that situation.
Yeah, and again, I can understand that. There could be some logic to that, simply to, again, put things on pause till you get stuff straightened out, right? Otherwise, I mean, yeah, I do feel for the folks coming here expecting one thing and finding something very different. Difficult to find a job, can't find housing that's affordable. So, yeah, creates a lot of chaos, uncertainty. Let's touch base a bit, if we can, on the ArriveCan app. Won't this be fun?
Wow.
Again, well-intentioned, I suppose, or was it? Well, Canada's Auditor General finding that the federal government did not follow procurement rules in awarding these contracts to groups like GC Strategies. And so, and again, this is like, what, $100 million worth of contracts, something like that?
At least.
And the government actually paying these groups even when the work wasn't completed, but we'll pay you anyway. Like,
Right.
This is gross incompetence.
It is. It's more than that. I think it's corruption. And what's really, I think, frustrating for Canadians is the lack of accountability.
Yeah.
Okay, sure, you made a mistake. A contract shouldn't have been awarded. So let's see some accountability. Let's see some change. But SNC Lavalin, which was a huge scandal 5 years ago. Everybody remembers the Jody Wilson-Raybould and the stand that she took. Really, the Prime Minister himself should have faced public prosecution for this. SNC Lavalin not only got out of that unscathed, they're still receiving massive government contracts. And what we've seen, it isn't unique to the Liberal government, but is certainly acute within the Liberal government, going all the way back to the sponsorship scandal in John Chrétien in the 1980s and 90s, which brought down the Paul Martin government eventually. That type of accountability we're not seeing anymore. And I think this is a bellwether. It's a sign that something is seriously wrong in our public politics, where we're not seeing ministers resign. We're not seeing companies being required to repay money. We're not seeing prosecutions of essentially what we're talking about is public fraud here, fraud of the Canadian taxpayer. And we're not seeing that kind of accountability. And to me, that's the most concerning thing, because that's a sign that the government sees itself as operating outside of the rule of law, that they simply are incorrigible. And once you do that, once you permit that to go on, all you're going to get is more of that behavior. And this now to my mind, this is one of the hallmarks of the Trudeau era government. They simply have no regard for the rule of law, and they seem to think that they operate above the law. And of course, it's we Canadians who suffer. We foot the bill for it.
Yeah, and again, if we don't have consequences for these kinds of actions, then we're essentially rewarding these kinds of actions, and they'll repeat themselves over and over again. So, what options do we have as Canadians? Well, we do have the option, of course, of exercising our democratic rights and voting this sort of thing out, but we seem to vote it back in again and again.
We didn't do that. So we didn't do that. Yeah, and it's interesting that Canadians didn't hold the Liberal government accountable. And what we're seeing right now, unfortunately, is that a fraud was committed against Canadians. The bill of goods that the voter was sold about what Mark Carney and his new Liberal government would be was that they would be a return to sanity. That was one of the catchphrases. But what we're seeing right now is not only continued incompetence, I would say deepening incompetence, deepening corruption, And with bills like C2 and C63 and others that they're bringing into force, we're seeing actually not only more of the same that we saw during Justin Trudeau's regime, but actually a deepening, a doubling down, if you will. For
Mm.
example, on MAID, they're going to make it legal for teenagers who are not even adults to
Oh man.
enter into the MAID program without even informing their parents. I mean, this is really horrifying in a country like Canada.
Absolutely. This is one of our key issues is made. Again, we could do an entire program on that, but what's coming down the pipe here over the next couple of years could have a very serious negative effect on our nation. Absolutely. In Alberta, the Fairness and Safety in Sport Act recently got put into action here. Bill 29, I think it takes effect on September 1st, I believe. So no more biological males in girls' sports teams. So, I mean, I'm thankful for that. We want to keep everybody safe here. Of course, not everybody agrees with me on that one. They're also talking about, so we're not going to allow biological males into the girls' teams, but they, at the same time, want to encourage the creation and expansion of mixed co-ed basically divisions of sports, and that way, if you've got a child that's transgender, whatever, and you're okay with males and females playing together, there'll be co-ed leagues set up, and I guess if there's enough interest, well, you guys can join those. I'm curious to see if there actually will be much interest in that, but is this going to be able to withstand, I guess, legal scrutiny? Because I'm sure there will be some pushback on it.
Well, I think the situation in Canada, unfortunately, is that legally our law still recognizes some concept of transgender. I think that this, in time, I predict that this is going to become an historical anomaly, that it will cease to be, that the concept, that this idea that there's some other identity other than biological sex, I think is going to be sort of a characteristic of our age, and that at some point we're going to look back through the lens of history and see that this was a lot of nonsense. But presently, that's not what the law is. The law has expanded this concept of transgender into an articulated human right, which to me is really this pure sophistry. It's perverting the law in order to achieve a political agenda. But for the time being, I think we're going to have to see how this all plays out. One thing that I've been noticing, Paul, is that as we entered into quote unquote Pride Month, June 1st, I was watching closely, and it seems that the enthusiasm for for Pride Month and some of the events has really waned. I know many of the parades and things like that have been canceled due to a lack of interest. And I noticed that many of the politicians who normally virtue signal about Pride Month didn't do so this year. And so I think that may be a sign that the public is tiring of this issue, that they see it as a sign of division. I'm not saying that in order to sort of punch down on people who are suffering from gender dysphoria. I'm just saying, as a reality, I think that it has been a very divisive situation for us to sort of go down the rabbit hole into converting something that really is something that should require love and empathy and understanding, and frankly counseling, and inverting that into something that is an articulable human right, a legal right that can be used to compel the speech and to bully and even imprison others who don't agree with that particular worldview or ideology. And I think that reality reality always has a way of winning out, and I think that may be what's happening right now with the transgender movement. I sense that that's true.
Okay, yeah, very interesting. Appreciate your feedback on that. And tied in with that, a couple of things going on in Canada here too. Just briefly, maybe you may have heard about the Waterloo Region District School Board there. Juno News first reported on this. I think they obtained some copies of material used for a professional development weekend or something like that for some of their teachers and staff, that the word family is apparently a harmful concept rooted in white supremacy. Some of the other slides they had up on the screen there. Apparently, the word family implies the valuing of positions of male hierarchy, a nuclear family structure, obedience without question, and the sacrificing of personal boundaries for the sake of the family. Another slide listed characteristics of white supremacy culture, including perfectionism, individualism, objectivity, worship of the written word, paternalism, and power hoarding. That's apparently all tied in with family, and somehow this
Right.
is white supremacy. I have trouble following that. I'm like, really?
Well, this is, I mean, everything, there's nothing new under the sun. What we're seeing is the continuing leftist attack upon Christian and biblical values. Nearly everything you listed there, Paul, is all the way we're told we're supposed to live in the good book and by our Lord and Savior. But the interesting thing is that it's only Christian societies, it's only societies that are based upon Judeo-Christian values that value tolerance. And this is why, for example, someone like Christopher Richard Dawkins recently, who said, although he's a very devout, very
Yep.
well-known atheist, he said that he prefers to live in a culturally Christian society
Yep.
because it's that society which allows people of differing views and beliefs to flourish. And so what we're seeing, though, unfortunately, is this leftist attack upon Judeo-Christian values, one of which is the core unit, which is the family, and of course
Yeah.
in conservative in conservative thinking, it's the family that is the constituent unit of society and not the individual.
Yeah, and we've got to keep on, I think, just building up family. Without it, Canada, I
Yes.
think, is doomed without strong families.
I
I'm out
agree.
of time here again. Leighton, always a pleasure talking to you. Leighton Grey, our guest. Please check out his show, X at Grey Matter Convo. Thanks for watching us. Again, WizeUp.ca.